So my name is Mike Smith. I want to welcome you all to the inaugural Conversations at FAS. Conversations at FAS is a series of faculty forums created to explore topics related to Harvard's mission of teaching and research. The topic this spring is redefining teaching and learning for the 21st century. The program will focus on work already being done by our outstanding and diverse faculty. I hope will help identify ways and opportunities for us to promote collaboration among our faculty and enable faculty to share their experiences and their knowledge with all of their colleagues. Today, our topic is active learning. Active learning represents the broadest conceptual framework encompassing a variety of student-focused learning. These approaches to teaching are sometimes called constructivists, as they go beyond the traditional college lecture format in which a student is simply a passive listener. Harvard faculty employ many different techniques that would be characterized as active learning. Famous examples include Eric Mazur's just-in-time teaching, using classroom clickers for student group problem solving, interactive lecturing like that of Michael Sandel's Justice course, and adaptations of the case method as employed at Harvard's business and law schools. When you look carefully, we have countless innovative examples of active learning in our general education, freshman seminars, and throughout our curriculum. For example, there are a number of courses taught at Harvard that incorporate instruction that takes place outside of the traditional classroom. This instruction might include, but is not limited to, course-based internships, field work, research lab work, service, and community-based learning. Some faculty have adopted the widely used terminology activity-based learning to describe such courses, particularly those that involve fieldwork in our local communities. Service learning finds its inspiration in theories on active learning and uses research to teach civic responsibility and civic engagement, and, as we all hope, to produce more socially aware citizens. Courses at Harvard this spring with a service learning component have been taught by Chris Winship, who has chaired a faculty committee on this matter as part of our formulation of the Gen Ed curriculum, and of course, joins us today. But also by Doris Sommer and Marshall Gantz, to name a few others. Overall, the practice of supplementing traditional classroom teaching with more hands-on experiential learning is common to a very large number of courses taught at Harvard and truly transcends disciplinary boundaries. While there is still much controversy about how and whether to implement these sorts of approaches to learning, there is considerable evidence out there that learners through kindergarten, through 12th grade, even through medical school, garner much from these sorts of approaches. Just to give a few examples, in Where's the Evidence That Active Learning Works, published in 2006, Joel Michael cites numerous studies that attest to its effectiveness. How Colleges Affect Students, a Third Decade of Research by Pasquarelli and Terenzini, published in 2005, found that the mean performance, that is the 50th percentile of an experimental active learning group, outperformed or exceeded the performance of a 60th percentile of a control group, which was taught by using traditional passive learning approaches. It would seem that this is reason enough for us to reflect upon efforts within our faculty and have forums such as this. So with this as background, I would like to introduce today's panelists, and I have encouraged them to use this forum as we would a classroom as an opportunity for active learning, which means that I truly hope that all of you will participate and become actively involved in what we're trying to accomplish today after our panelists give their opening remarks. So now I'd like to introduce all three of them. The first is Chris Winship, the Diker-Tishman Professor of Sociology and a member of the faculty of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He did his undergraduate work in sociology and mathematics at Dartmouth College and his graduate work in our own department of sociology. After leaving Harvard, he did a one-year postdoctoral fellowship at the Institute for Research on Poverty at the University of Wisconsin and a two-year fellowship at the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. In 1980, he joined the sociology department at Northwestern University, and during his 12 years there, he was director of the program in mathematical methods in the social sciences, and for 4 years was chair of the Department of Sociology there. He was also a founding member of the Northwestern's Department of Statistics and held a courtesy appointment in economics. He was also director of the Economics Research Center at the National Opinion Research Center from 1984 to 1986, and he joined Harvard in 1992. Since 1995, he's been the editor of Sociological Methods and Research, and he's a faculty associate of the Harvard Institute for Quantitative Social Science, the Harvard Science, Technology, and Society program, and the Harvard Hauser Center for Nonprofit Organizations. He's currently doing research on a number of interesting topics, including the effects of education on mental ability and the causes of racial difference in the performance in elite colleges and universities. Diane Paulus is the artistic director of the American Repertory Theater and professor of practice of theater. She did her undergraduate work in social studies here at Harvard and her graduate work at Columbia University School of the Arts. Her ART credits include Johnny Baseball, Best of Both Worlds, and The Donkey Show, which spent 6 years off Broadway and included tours in London, Edinburgh, Madrid, and Evian, France. Her long list of theater productions include Hair, which won a Tony Award for Best Revival of a Musical and a Tony Award nomination for Best Direction of a Musical. She's taught numerous courses, including Theater, Dream, Shakespeare, with Professor Marjorie Garber, a class that blends art making and scholarship, teamwork, and innovation. In 2009, Ms. Paulus received the Harvard College Women's Leadership Award, and this year she was named one of the 50 most powerful women in Boston by Boston Magazine. David Malan is a lecturer on computer science at the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. He received his AB, his SM, and his PhD in computer science from SEAS, and has taught courses at Tufts and the Harvard Extension School. In the college, he teaches the wildly successful and popular introductory computer science course known as CS50. While in graduate school, David founded 2 startups, Crimson Tutors and Discaster. He worked part-time for the Middlesex District Attorney's Office as a forensic investigator. He currently serves as the Chief Information Officer for Mindset Media and publishes on instructional technologies and pedagogy. So to reiterate, I've asked each panelist to briefly describe the role of active learning in their teaching. And after they have had a chance to speak, we will open it up for questions and what I hope will truly be a lively discussion. We would certainly be interested to hear in your experiences in active learning, both those that were successful as well as those that were not. Please think about how, as you listen today, we might be able to move forward as a faculty and as a university in this area. And again, let's use this event as an opportunity for active learning. Chris, would you like to begin?
So I'm going to walk around because I think if you're doing active-based learning, you ought to be active. I also like to look at the screen with the audience. So I was recently asked why somebody who actually spent most of his life developing sort of sophisticated, abstract, they often difficult to understand, statistical models, ever got involved in activity-based learning. And there's sort of many pieces to the story, but I want to just give you a little piece. One of the problems with being a statistician or being good in statistics is everybody thinks you know how to do an evaluation. And so in 1994, I got asked to chair an evaluation committee for a summer program being run by a set of inner-city black churches, predominantly in Roxbury and Dorchester. And this resulted in my spending a couple of days a week over in Dorchester. And quickly, I was learning sort of how complicated the world out there was. And I think this came home to me most strongly when I was sitting in a meeting with the head of probation in Dorchester Court and one of the ministers, and then we're going through an hour-long argument about whether a particular person ought to be sent back to jail. This was a probationer who had violated probation by having a gun. And it just went on and on. If I had a lot of time, I'd tell you about the content of it. But the key point for me was, boy, I needed about 300 variables in my statistical model to capture what was going on in that conversation. So I think this is an important insight, which is theoretical conceptual models are enormously important. They help us think, but testing them against the real world is absolutely critical and is what pushes our thinking to become more sophisticated. So Mike has already defined activity-based learning. I wanted to give you my own definition, which is just a course involving substantial experiential or learning by doing component outside the classroom. Now, I think the key insight here is to realize this is not all that new. The sciences have recognized for decades that just doing lectures in the classroom doesn't work. You got to put students in labs. Unclear to me why the social sciences and the humanities are so far behind on this insight. But really, one way to think about ADL is taking that insight and really trying to apply it to a much broader set of classes. Now, some of you know, but I bet many of you don't, is we've actually been running a pilot project at Harvard since 2005. We've had over 1,500 students in it, 30 courses, total of 80 offerings. We would be a lot farther along if there hadn't been a fiscal crisis. This whole thing was approved by Jay in 2008, the week before everything fell apart. But we're going to get there anyways, right? Here's just a simple list of courses that were taught this fall. I just want to point out a couple of things. One is they're across the divisions. There are science courses, there are social science courses, there are humanities courses. And then a particular feature is that ABL has ended up being particularly effective in the languages. I don't know how you felt about your language courses in high school and college. I found them really boring. But you'll see up there Italian, Spanish, French. Some semesters there's also Portuguese in the community. And what these courses involve is putting a student in an internship in an organization, often a nonprofit, where the language that is spoken is the one that they're studying. And so they're getting an immersion experience. Just what we know is the best way to learn a language. And then they come back in class, they have to talk about, they have to write about their experiences, of course, in the language that they're studying. Now, why activity-based learning? Why active learning? I think of it as that there are sort of 5 challenges. One is, how do we engage students? And the typical observation that often is made is that the research shows that if you're in a lecture, on average, within 10 minutes, students have totally turned out and they're not listening to anything you're saying. Activity-based learning really provides a way to get students involved. 2, and this is another source of my own involvement, which was through the Standing Committee on Public Service, showing students the connection between the classroom, the real world, and the lives they live and want to live. Certainly in the nearly 20 years I've been at Harvard, I've heard lots of complaints from students, not about my courses, that, yeah, they're interesting, but what does it have to do with anything out there in the real world? Third, this is really a point about learning pedagogy, is that if you're going to teach students anything, you've got to connect with them with what they already know. And one of the great things about field-based type courses is students can manage for themselves how they connect up. So the fact that you have students who have very diverse experience come with very diverse knowledge, they can make it work for themselves. Fourth, you got to push back. You got to decenter. And like me going to Dorchester, I think there's nothing more decentering than the real world out there. Harvard undergraduates, you know, they've been known to think they know exactly how everything works. Nothing better than to send them out in the real world and have them quickly discover that it's a whole lot more complicated. And then 5, and I'm going to show you a model in a second, activity-based learning becomes a way for really deepening knowledge, not just sort of the superficial, I think I know it, but by challenging students to think about how it relates to their actual experiences, we push them to think about things a lot deeper. At the core is really this learning model here. This comes out of a book by James Zool called The Art of Changing the Brain, Enriching the Practice of Teaching by Exploring the Biology of Learning. As Mike has implicitly also suggested in his remarks, I think one of the exciting things that's really going on in pedagogy these days is we're starting to really make it scientific and understand the biology of what's going on. And what you see here at the top is concrete experience. At the bottom, abstract hypotheses. You can start any place in this circle, but the idea is that you need to go around it. So perhaps you start with some abstract ideas about how you think the world works. You're going to test that against some concrete experience, and then you need to have the reflective experience when you come back. So what I want to do is tell you about a particular course that I've taught called Reinventing Boston. I've taught it for the last 4 years. Some of you might remember that when Derek Bach was around and the acting president, one of his greatest harangues was that we weren't doing anything to really teach civic education. I mentioned this. And yet we were claiming to produce tomorrow's leaders. Well, for me, the question was, how could you teach a course that actually involves civic education and not call it, you know, Civic Education 101, which if you were lucky, you'd probably get 3 students in. So we've come up with this course. The course has a number of goals that really is around the structure. The first is to challenge the students with an empirical conundrum. This conundrum you probably all are not aware of also. If you go back to the 1970s, when I was a graduate student here, Boston had the worst economic indicators of any major city in this country. Cities had been written off generally, and Boston was #1 on the list as a city that was just going to go nowhere. Wow. I guess the pundits and academics were wrong in that prediction. In addition, Boston was known as, and with some good justification, the most racist city in the country. We were in the middle of the school busing crisis. Now, there's still race issues in Boston for sure, but I think it would be enormously hard to argue that we haven't come a long way. So the first thing is this sort of intellectual puzzle of how did we get here given where we started from? Second, and more simply, is just to get students out of the Harvard Square bubble. One of the things I find most remarkable is here's Harvard in this amazingly interesting city that's highly accessible because of the T, and yet, you know, going to Central Square is considered a foreign adventure. Third, and I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in a second, is to expose these students to a whole variety of research methods. Of course, we can't teach them all these methods in a single thing, but we want to give them a taste and hopefully get them more involved. And then finally, toward the end of the course, we present them with a normative dilemma. And that's the question of, who is Boston going to be for? So if you look at the last 30 years, the wealthy and the well-educated have done enormously well in Boston. Boston, however, is one of the cities with the highest degrees of income inequality in the country. It is also one of the most expensive, and by some reports, the most expensive city to live in the country. So what's going to happen to all those people who have high school educations and nothing more? All those new immigrant groups that are coming in. Boston, the city itself, is now a minority-majority city. And if we think that Boston should not be just for the rich and the well-educated, what are we going to do about it? Now, the course has 6 components. We spend the first couple of classes, really weeks, kind of just talking about how Boston has changed. A lot of emphasis on the economics change, emphasis also on the demographic change. When I was a student here in the 70s, Boston was an overwhelmingly white city. If you look at Boston now, one of the favorite things I like to point out is you look at the black community, there are actually 7 different ethnic groups and 5 different languages within Boston's black community. The notion that we have that the black community consists of African Americans is just not a correct characterization. We spent a bunch of time on various methods for studying Boston. I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a second. We use guest lecturers. And then a key part of the course is the students have to do 6 neighborhood visits and write short papers on those. And then when they come back from those, they talk about them in sections. So sections, the reflective component. One of the things I've discovered is that if you make section participation 25% of the student's grade, section participation is fabulous. Unbelievable how well prepared they come. And then finally, they write an extended analytic paper at the end. So in terms of research methodologies, they do learn about doing interviews, and they all have to do a number of interviews, about at least half a dozen. They're doing a bunch of ethnographic field work as they spend time in these neighborhoods observing what's going on. We provide them with access over the internet to different demographic data so they can understand both differences between neighborhoods and how neighborhoods have changed. For the last several years, we've been developing a GIS application called Boston Map, in which you can generate instantly maps about everything you can imagine. And then, interestingly, with cell phone photography and video, we are now finding they're bringing in visual stuff into their research projects as well. Here's an example of some of the guest speakers we've had. As you can see, they're some very prominent people. Mike Goldstein, founder of Charter School, Paul Grogan, the head of Boston Foundation, so on and so forth. Some years we've been able to get the mayor. What's been critical here for the students, and I was reading through the course evaluations for the last 2 years, and the students just think the guest speaker system is fabulous. And what I think is critical is it does several things. One is it provides quite different perspectives on the city. And in fact, one of the things we're asking students as we get toward the end of the course is, how do you put the elephant together, right? You've got the old blind man and the elephant analogy. How is it these people can see the same city in so many different ways? Second, turns out most of these people didn't grow up in Boston. So they've had very successful careers. This is not that insulated town that everybody says it is. You can become somebody quite important without having grown up here. And third, I see these people as really role models for these students about the kinds of things they might possibly do with their lives. In almost all these instances, these people are doing something that's totally different than what they thought they were going to be doing when they got out of college. Oops. Here are some examples of the course papers focused on South Boston waterfront. Very interesting paper on the North End and the fights going on between whether it should be a residential versus a commercial district. Interesting paper on sort of how media, particularly the newspapers, change. Look at sort of very different models of revitalization in Dorchester and the South End. And of course, one of the things we talk about in the course, and then here's a whole paper, is how Boston is used in the movies. You know, we sort of have this Boston noir sort of genre that we seem to always be stuck with. And so the interesting question of sort of how it ends. So I thought I'd end up by just reading you a couple of quotes from students to give you a sense of how their takeaways from it are. How am I doing on time? I need this. I'm okay. So this class rocks. I feel like, you know, this is the kind of comment that makes your day, right? You know. I'm not going to read you the bad ones. There were bad ones too, but you know, you just sort of kind of, you know, quickly go over those. I feel like everyone at Harvard should take it. This class really gets you to interact with Boston in a way that few students ever get the chance to. Love the guest lecture format because you get to hear sweet people and get so many different perspectives. Love the neighborhood visits. This course, that's one student. This course got students engaging with Boston and the outside world. I feel like I really broke out of the Harvard bubble. Wow. I learned so much about Boston, not only about Pacific neighborhoods that I did not know much about before, but also about the role of institutions, leaders, economic and environmental factors in shaping the life of Boston's residents and communities. This course has changed my perspective on local events and politics and has influenced my hopes for the future life and career in terms of which city or type of city I would like to live in and what role I want you to play in that city. Derek, I hope you're listening. We nailed it, at least for that student. I learned that there is a rich culture in American cities. Also, the neighborhood visits introduced me to the power of observation. Many of our speakers described their backgrounds. It was a relief to hear that many of them took many different paths before they found what they were doing today. Additionally, I have a new understanding of what it actually takes for a city to function. There are so many different players whose roles I have always overlooked. I learned that there are many different components that make up a city, and there are many different ways to define a city. Much of our discussion is theoretical and elusive, but is grounded in real practice, situations, and perspectives. So you can see I find this a really exciting course to teach. I think it's a nice example of activity-based learning, and at least what I have found is precisely when you push students to go out in the real world, it's then that they really connect up their ideas with what they're seeing and really get a sense of what it is that you're talking about. Thank you.
Okay, hi, I'm Diane Paulus, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm humbled to be here because I'm a new professor, but I was actually thinking as I was listening that I tend to think about the ART, which is the Loeb Drama Center over on 64 Brattle, as a big classroom. One of my missions here has been, how do I make the building vibrate with energy, not just the theater, but how do I make the lobby and the space and the windows transparent, and how can I make the entire activity of what we do there a hub of discourse? So I think I'm going to share a little bit with you about two classes that I've been involved with here at Harvard in the last 2 years. And then I'm going to show you some pictures and talk about the theater. And I think what I'm going to try to do is tell you things from the theatrical perspective and hope that they will ignite you and make you think about how you might apply some of these ideas in teaching. So there are two classes that Mike mentioned that, one class he mentioned and another one I'm doing this semester. The first was a course in the English department offered also through Gen Ed called Theater, Dream, and Shakespeare. And one thing I want to say up front, it was really my interest in reaching out to the university. The university was very interested in how the arts could become more central to the cognitive life of the college. As we all know, our president, Drew Faust, is very dedicated to the arts. And early on when the economy crashed, he said creativity is a form of knowledge. And it is now more than ever that we must enter the arts for problem solving. And you can bet that I wrote that down and I go everywhere and I say, this is my boss and this is why the arts matter. So I went to Professor Marjorie Garber's office because I actually studied with her when I was an undergrad. So I was a student who was impressed and marked by my teacher back in the 80s. And I went to her office and I said, I want to do a course. She said, I said I want to talk to her about these Shakespeare events that I wanted to plan. And she was the one who turned around and said, let's teach a course. And I really hadn't gone to her with that in mind. I just thought if I'm going to do a Shakespeare event, I better go talk to her so I get, good advice on what I'm doing. And I explained that there were 3 plays that had inspired theatrical events. And, what did she think the festival should be called? I mean, that's why I went to talk to her. And then she had the inspired idea to do a course. So we put a syllabus together. And basically, the course took the students through the original source text, so the Shakespeare plays, was Midsummer Night's Dream, Macbeth, and The Winter's Tale. Took the students through theory related to the analysis of those plays, and then every student in the course, which was funded by the college, received a ART student pass, so they could get 5 coupon clickers to see the show. So that meant they could see all 3 and go back or invite a roommate and make it kind of a social event. And they attended all the productions as we were in real time with the course. So there was something already very special about the course because it only happened once. It was like a theater event. It was in real time with the season. There was a feeling in the room that they were taking it because it was happening now, related to the season. They were going to be seeing work that would only happen now. So there was something about that, which we always talk about in the theater. How do you make people feel like the reason why we move away from our laptops and away from being isolated and come into a room together, because you can't miss it. You can't get it unless you're in the room. So that feeling with the course was very much about participating in the season. So they read the plays, they studied the plays, and then they came and saw process behind the plays. They attended rehearsals. I brought the artists into the classroom. They talked about the productions. Then they all went to see the productions. Then Marjorie had them all write reviews about the productions, so they'd have to assert a critical point of view. We talked a lot about what it means to write criticism of theater. It led through to the fall and kind of an analysis of what it means to look at these topics of theater, dream, and Shakespeare, each production having an element of dream to it. The course I'm teaching this semester is also with Marjorie Garber. It's called Porgy and Bess, Performance in Context. Porgy and Bess, the great opera by George Gershwin, Ira Gershwin, and Du Bois Hayward, is actually having a major revival at the ART next fall. So it's opening in September. We'll be in production and rehearsal all summer. And this time I thought maybe it would be good to do a course in advance of the production to actually stimulate discussion and dialogue and make the effort over at the ART something that could be shared by the university. So we put together a course that also looks at the great history of Porgy and Bess, all the way back to its original form as a novel, and then a play, and then the film, and then the opera. And the students are also in meeting artists. Our choreographers coming into the classroom, our designers are coming in the classroom, our musical adapter. We'll be doing a little workshop in New York. We'll have a field trip down to New York so they can actually attend a rehearsal in New York City. And lastly, one thing I want to mention about that, there is a creative option for your final project, which I love. And the assignment is for the students to creatively engage with Porgy and Bess in a very wide option of format. They can write a directorial interpretation of a production that they have in their head. They can write a song that they would think might be well inserted within the original. They could create a set design. So this often makes students very nervous because they think, am I qualified? But we're really encouraging, again, the students to see how we at the ART are dealing with our choices and how they would then make choices. Kind of, I think, what we were hearing about. How do you get a student to apply themselves to a real world situation? In this case, a theater production. What is very special about Porgy and Bess this semester is I really believe that my interaction with the students and what I hear from them will actually impact the production. Because part of doing Porgy and Bess in the 21st century is, what do we make of this work in our 21st century, and how does it need to change and shift, and how do we place it in a context that will have meaning for a modern audience? So literally, I am looking, I think, as a teacher, to the students for information, to the students for point of view, that I've told them very frankly that their opinions and their questions will actually impact the creation of this production. So now I'm going to show you some pictures about from our shows at the theater. Two things I want to say up front. Okay, PowerPoint is not my specialty. Okay, we'll go to Sleep No More in a minute. What I've been very interested at the ART, which I think applies to how we teach a class, is audience. And for me, how do you activate an audience? Because again, in my profession, people feel like you can see it in a film, you can watch a video, you can watch everything on YouTube. Why do I need to come out? Everybody's busy. I find the act of an audience coming to the theater an incredibly generous act that we need to take seriously. And there's a trend in my profession, the arts, to say, oh, the audience doesn't want culture anymore. Oh, we're a depraved society. The audience has left the building. Nobody wants culture anymore. And that can be a syndrome in my field of practitioners, sort of bemoaning the state of the audience. I don't tolerate that point of view because I feel I'm a producer and a creator, and it's my job to actually engage the audience, and the audience is the partner, and I have to think, why is this necessary? Why should an audience want to put aside 2 hours of their time and pay money to come and be in the room? So I take that very seriously. I look at the audience as a partner. And in the theater, you cannot actually have theater without an audience. It's not a piece of art on a wall or a book you've written that can then be passed on. It must happen in real time and space. So I have pushed the mission of the ART, which is to expand the boundaries of theater to a very extreme edge of the graph, to really explore how do we activate audience. So one of our productions last year called Sleep No More, or just spacebar. And maybe can we turn the lights a little bit so we can see the pictures better? Someone was going to help us with that. Yeah. So Sleep No More, talk about taking students out into Boston or Central Square. Sleep No More was a production we did with a Punch Drunk in London, and they came to us, and we created a version of the play Macbeth in the Brookline, the old Lincoln School in Brookline. So this was a show off-site in an abandoned school where all 44 rooms of the school were installed as the world of Macbeth. So you had the heath on the top, and I don't know, how many people here saw Sleep No More? Some, fabulous. So this was a challenge because a lot of my board and my subscribers thought, well, how are you going to get people to Brookline? And what I've always said, and what I've tried to do with the ART, it's the idea of the ART. It's not the building, it's the idea of what we're doing, and we can find it anywhere. So in this case, it was in Brookline. Action took place on stairwells. Literally, if you happened to walk in a room, you'd see Macbeth, Duncan being murdered by Macbeth. He'd leave, and you'd have to run and follow him to find out what happened next. So it was really an experience of theater where you're running, and I forgot to mention, every audience member received a mask, and you went in your own space and time in the building. So it was very much of a narrative that was created. This is the audience lining up outside. And central to the Punch Drunk idea is you have a very privatized experience, and then you come back into a social environment. This was our little club in the, where you checked your coat. And you would come back and you'd interact with audience, and you'd say, oh my God, did you see the snake in the bathtub? And your friend would say, I didn't see the snake, and you put your mask back on and you go back in the building. So it was very much about creating experience, having an experience, sharing experience, processing experience, being excited to go back and get more. So these are just some pictures to give you a taste of the environment. The Donkey Show. How many people have seen the Donkey Show? The same people. Okay, we'll have to diversify. The Donkey Show is a version of Midsummer Night's Dream that I did in New York, and it was the first show I opened the season with. And we took our second stage, which is over on Arrow Street, and it was a black box, and I got very interested in making it into a nightclub theater, because I think in the theater, and it's interesting, we're sitting in a lecture hall, but I'm always trying to change the architecture, because I feel like the architecture can create behavior. It can create, even Peter Brook, the famous director, wants hard seats because he doesn't want people to get too comfortable because you start to fall asleep. So he purposely, when he redid the Harvey Theater in Brooklyn at the Brooklyn Academy, he wanted, hard seats so you sit forward. And I'm always interested in audiences that are leaning forward, right? That we're forward. How do we keep people awake and engaged? So the Donkey Show does that. The show starts actually outside in the street. So we take an unexpected beginning, and this is the character of Puck. It's set in a 1970s disco. And then we go inside, and this is the theater. So it looks like this. People are standing, and I had to have the moment with the Cambridge Code, the council that came, and I literally stood with this man, and he was like looking at the empty room, was like, where are the seats? It's not a theater. And I had to give him a big, passionate speech about how in the Globe Theater you stood, and this is just like the Globe Theater because you're standing like a groundling, and then there are the seats, if you want to sit and you're a royalty, you can sit and you have a seat like Queen Elizabeth. And he kind of looked and nodded and said, I get it. So, and then we went forward. So this is, the action takes place above you and through you and around you. It celebrates a very powerful form of community that has been our experience with this show. It's still playing every Saturday night, so if you haven't seen it, you can come see it. Best of Both Worlds was the last show in the Shakespeare Festival. This was an experiment, and I also believe theater is about experiments and about questions, and this is, again, I'm sure why we teach and why we look for new ideas. This was The Winter's Tale adapted as a gospel musical. And my idea was to actually bring people from the community into the theater. Not to say, come to my theater and be part of it, but actually be in the show and be part of the community. So we actually cast a house choir. You'll see them here all in the robes. They were called the Glorious Voices Chorus, and they were members from the community, from Boston, from the Tufts Gospel Choir, other college choirs and churches, the Kumbah Singers, and we had a rotating roster of volunteer chorus. And they came every night to the theater, and they got trained, and they got put in before the show started, and then they would watch the show, and they would come on for the big finale. So this was, again, this is kind of like, I like the theater to look like this. People standing and lights on. You see the string of lights that went out. That was very purposeful to make the auditorium feel like it was one body. The Blue Flower was a show that just was this past, before the holidays. This was a show about the Dada art movement and about the lives of 4 artists and scientists, one based on Marie Curie. It took sort of fact and created a fictional account of their lives, and Max Beckman, the artist. But why I wanted to show you this is we collaborated with the OFA. This is a picture of the production. So it had silent films from the period, very inspired by the Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich. And then we actually had students create Dada art, and they were in the lobby. So our lobby became an art gallery, and it was a seminar conducted in Adam's house. So again, just ways to break the mold. It's not just if you're performing on the stage, but could you create art? And an art exhibit outside the theater is as much a part of the event. So these are the works on the wall. That was a fabulous exhibit. And this last show was a show we just finished about a week ago about Bucky Fuller. And what I loved about this show is we engaged different professors and architects and scientists who came to be part of this event. That's Tommy Dara. You might recognize him from the ART, who played Buckminster Fuller. But what was so great about the production is we had a series called Bucky and Me, and we had people like Peter Meisen, who's the founder of the Global Energy Network Institute, come and be part of the production. Amy Edmondson, who's from the professor of leadership and management at the Harvard Business School. Don Ingbar, who was inspired by Bucky Fuller for his work at the Wyss Institute. Thomas Zung, the architect, and Antoine Picone, who's the professor of history of architecture and technology at Harvard. And what we did here is we also turned our lobby into a gallery space, and we had people who came forward, professors and other architects, who shared their work that was inspired by Bucky Fuller that went into our lobby. We had interactive exhibits for audience to relate to, so people could play with different forms of the geodesic dome. And my favorite spin-off of this was, getting to it here, the snowball installation. This was, again, a spontaneous event. We started noticing snowballs in the shape of the geodesic dome outside our theater. And audience, they would appear overnight, and as audience would walk in, they would see these snowballs. So, which just delighted me, because I think my interest is, how can we make theater not just an artistic event, but how can we break the boundary? How can we get people who are not theater people interested? That's my total goal, is to return theater to the center of society, not just as a kind of cultural elite pastime. And I think, for the work here at the university, to talk about how students who are not considering themselves art students, to get them involved in arts classes and creative work. I feel like if I can touch an undergraduate and have them feel the power of art to transform the mind and the soul, then whatever they go on to do, they will have that. They will be changed by that, and they will be a civic member more fully by having an experience of art. And it is everything you've seen by the photos, I think, will get you to understand the idea of experience, that it's not just cut off in the head, that it's the mind and the heart and the body working together. So I think I'll stop there. We'll talk more, but that's some of the thoughts I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for the delay. My name is David Malan, and I'm the current custodian of a course called CS50. And we've spent a lot of time over the past few years thinking about how we can enervate the students in this course, how we can really get them excited about the field, even if they don't intend to go on and major or concentrate in computer science, but simply want to explore a new area. And we, at least in this particular field, I think face an uphill battle from the get-go, in that a lot of high school programs right now, among them the AP curriculum, are less than enthralling for students. And students enter college, whether here or anywhere else, having really an unfortunate perception of what computer science is. Unfortunately, many high school programs give the sense that it's just about programming, and it's just about programming very specifically in a language called Java. And it takes them many weeks to get to the point of just making things that they might find interesting, and this is quite unfortunate, because even if these aren't necessarily students who then go off to Harvard, they are certainly capable across the board of getting both excited about this field and really creating something by the end of just a single semester. And so that's really been our focus in CS50. And yet structurally, this course is fairly traditional. We have lectures twice a week, we have sections, we have office hours, we have problem sets, we have exams. And so it doesn't really seem like there's much room really for us to diverge from the experience that students might have in any other course. But we try very specifically to focus on the student's experience in the course's problem sets. So even though there is me talking a couple of times a week, and there's a teaching fellow at the head of their section, it really is in the course's sections, these 90-minute, more intimate environments led generally by one of our undergraduate TFs, where students in groups of 10 to 15 really get their hands dirty in the material, and then, after exiting that classroom, go on to spend 10, 15, sometimes 25 hours per week outside of the classroom actually doing, and frankly, actually learning. You do not learn what programming is, you do not learn what computer science is, arguably, for just hearing a guy like me talk on some stage, but rather actually experiencing the field. And so, for instance, even though students do begin the semester with the simplest of problem sets, taking a black and white screen and just making it say hello world to them, and those are commands that they've typed, well, we very quickly transition to what we describe as very domain-specific problem sets. We tell the tale of myself walking around campus, taking photographs of places and people that I know, but every semester I somehow seem to accidentally format my digital camera's compact flash card, and so I use my old forensic investigator skills, and I make a forensic image of this media card so that we can hand it out to hundreds of students, and then we challenge the students to recover all of the photographs that I myself lost. We also embed in the same image not just photographs of random places and things, but these days very specific computer science faculty, frankly, in hopes of breaking the ice. So the little brownie at the end of this experiment is the little challenge is for then students to have those incredibly awkward knocks at the door of various CS faculty say, "Hi, I'm a student in CS50, can I take a picture with you?" And so what emerges from this are one of our students here with Professor Schieber, Another here with Professor Hans-Peter Pfister, but for us within CS, frankly, it's been a wonderful way of simply breaking the ice. But the problem sets are the students' steps toward really what is the climax of the course. So some of you may have seen over the past few years, we've begun to hold what we call a CS50 fair, which is frankly the sort of college equivalent of a middle school science fair, where we take all 500 of our students across the street to Northwest Science Lab, which has a beautiful open atrium. We set up some bar height tables with popcorn and cupcakes and all the fun stuff on top, and then we put all 500 of our students in a room over the course of 5 or so hours, and we invite the campus, we invite their friends, we invite the staff, we invite, frankly, some of their families have showed up to actually see what these students have produced. And so rather than do this disservice with my own words, I thought I'd actually bring a few photos. This is just a glimpse, for instance, of what went on this past fall in the space. If we then zoom in on some of my favorite photos, you really can't plan a photo like this. But what all of our students will do, 99% of college undergraduates now have laptops here, so they bring their own laptops, they set up their final projects, most of which are web-based, and so it's actually something demonstrable that they can interact with and show to people, and so this is one such demonstration there. Another one that rather captured our imaginations is this one here with 3 of our students, and this one too, one of whom went on to be one of the course's own teaching fellows. But this is just one aspect, and frankly, this is just the culmination of the course, and what we've tried to do in this past year too is really try to recreate this experience and not just have it be the climax of the course, but really a step toward in an ongoing process. And so we instituted what we called a hackathon this year, whereby toward semester's end, all students are challenged after having done 9 of those such problem sets to actually spec out, to design something of their own, propose it to their teaching fellows, and then assuming we bless that project, they go off and pretty much implement most anything they want. And what you see at the fair is precisely those projects. But about a week prior this year, we decided that we really wanted to instill this shared experience in students. And frankly, to harp on what Diane brought up too, it really has been for us in our minds in 50, this creation of not just a course, not just an academic experience, but really a social experience and a memorable experience at that. And so we invited students down the road in Kendall Square, where Microsoft has a beautiful lab facility, very high-tech and contemporary, and we all showed up, all 200 students of the class decided to opt in. Shuttle services brought us all down the street to Kendall Square. It was 8 p.m. when we got there. We served some pizza at 9 p.m., and then what ensued was an all-night hackathon where we had 200 of our students literally hacking or working on their final projects. And what was amazing about it, frankly, looking back, was that we, the teachers, we, the teaching fellows and the staff, we were really just there to kind of work on our own things as well. And what we found was that students sitting next to each other were talking, were helping each other, and it wasn't really office hours, which the course does have innumerable numbers of throughout the semester, but really these were students who had already bootstrapped themselves to the point of knowing how to find things online and figuring out how to apply lessons past to the current problems at hand. We have photos like this, which really captures the individual nature of this. I will admit that besides pizza at 9 p.m., it definitely helped in the interest of active learning to have Chinese food at 2 a.m., which looked a little something like this. That definitely kept the activity levels high. And then we also shuttled ourselves to IHOP at 5 a.m. as sort of the climax where such images as this came. But to paint the picture perhaps a little more firsthand, I'll point out that, I mean, these are sort of out of the ordinary experiences that students would generally have in the course. Fairs are fairly atypical, and yet the lectures remain in the course. I will concede that, frankly, I view my own lectures and the aspect of lectures to really just be one piece of the puzzle. And the reality is it's a piece experienced by only a subset of the students, certainly by semester's end. But this has given me cause to think quite a bit about what really is my role, especially these days when I'm competing, frankly, with myself on video, which is accessible any number of hours of the day. You can play me at twice the speed and therefore get through lectures twice as efficiently. I mean, I genuinely view this as a challenge to myself as to what really should the role be of lectures in CS50. It's definitely an opportunity, I think, to present conceptual material, but I also do think to actually incentivize students to get there and stay there throughout the semester, that it needs to be a compelling experience. And I hope you'll forgive that in a moment I'm going to give you a firsthand sense of that with regard to this topic here. So a recurring theme in computer science is that of searching and sorting. How can you find things fast? For instance, Google, how do you search through billions of web pages quickly? Well, there's some fairly easy fundamentals that can be introduced in the context of an early on computer science course, but a lot of the answers initially revolve around this kind of picture. So this notion of logarithmic growth, and you might have a quick flashback to what a logarithm is, but it's not necessarily something that a student, whether in high school or even college, can easily wrap their mind around, especially if they only see it once in a while, say in a math class a couple of years prior. Well, just to paint this picture, here's a room full of a whole bunch of people, and if I needed to take attendance here manually, sort of grade school style, I would start with counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and if we then plot the amount of time it takes someone like me to count the number of people in this room, well, on the x-axis here we'll have the size of the problem, the number of people in this room. The y-axis is how long it takes to actually count all of those people, so it stands to reason that this should be a straight line, because it takes me one sort of strike of my hand to count each person in this room. Now, that's not all that fast, especially if twice as many people now enter this room. It's going to take me twice as long to count these people, and so it just doesn't scale, certainly. Even in a classroom environment, there comes a point where you can't take attendance without wasting way too much time. Well, then you think back to grade school too, and you realize, well, you can count in twosies, right? 2, 4, 6, 8. Now, this is a pretty impressive improvement. Now my algorithm, my running time is twice as fast. So if we depict this, the thing is essentially slid over to the right, and that means my algorithm is better, but it's not really fundamentally better. I would really love it for it to be the case that as the size of this problem, as the number of people in this room grows, I would much prefer that it not take more and more time, but maybe just a little more time. And I don't quite know how to express this kind of algorithm in green here, but whatever that line is, that's what I want to be able to implement. That's the algorithm that I would want to be able to employ. Well, I brought such an algorithm with me here today. As Mike has thrown down the gauntlet, this is a class in active learning, so I do hope you'll humor me, FAS faculty, in all standing up together for just a moment, so that we can count ourselves in such a way that that green line is in fact our reality. So per step 1, we're on the right track. Per step 2, think to yourself, number 1, put the number 1 in your head. Step 3 is pair off with someone standing next to you, add your 2 numbers together, and then just one of you should sit down. Step 4 is then repeat. And ideally, there will be one man or one woman left standing here. Go. What is the relevance of that? Well, first, I will say that in my 4 years of teaching CS50, that demo has actually never worked out correctly. In theory, it should, right? If we all start with 1, and then you're essentially handing your number off verbally to someone else, in theory, you should all one person should end up having the final tally. But more compellingly, in terms of the speed of that algorithm, if you think about what was happening, in theory, all of you first stood up, then in theory, half of you stood down. So the size of our problem has immediately been halved. Then another half of you sat down. So we've gone from a problem of size full to half to quarter to 1/8 to 1/16, and that's when you start to see pictures like this. And when we do this in the very first lecture of CS50, that's the message we're trying to send to students. It's one thing to represent the notion of a logarithm formulaically, but it's a lot more memorable, a lot more compelling, I think, to actually feel and see what that algorithm would be like. Now, so that it's not just us participating in this, we film most everything in CS50, so I thought I would conclude with just a look at one such exercise that went on in the class that actually borrows the same idea. What you'll see in a moment is that I took the chalkboard and sanders, we put up 8 pieces of paper, just with Scotch tape, and behind each of them I wrote a number in chalk, and they were pretty much random numbers. And then we asked for a brave volunteer from the hundreds of students in the classroom to come up on stage and then find a certain number. And the goal of this exercise was very similar in spirit. If you just have a random bunch of doors behind which is some number, it's pretty hard to do much better than just guessing where that number is. But it led us ultimately to a conversation about sorting the numbers behind these doors so that the follow-up, which you won't see, is just how that same student can do an order of magnitude better than his first attempt at that problem. So I give you Sean from CS50. Okay, so your task here, Sean, is the following. I have hidden behind these doors the number 7, but tucked away in some of these doors as well are other non-negative numbers. And your goal is to think of this top row of numbers as just an array, or just a sequence of pieces of paper with numbers behind them. And your goal is, only using the top array here, find me the number 7. And we are then going to critique how you go about doing it. All right. Find us the number 7, please. 5, 19, 13. It's not a trick question. 1. At this point, your score is not very good, so you might as well keep going. 3. Go on. Frankly, I can't help but wonder what you're even thinking about. So, only the top row. So you got 3 left. So find me 7. $17. That clip is from 2008, and frankly, if there were ever a memorable moment, that was indeed one. Certainly for me, who remembered that clip to go pull it up for today, but also we hope the students who have that same experience. And honestly, I can't imagine that most of the students in that room weren't cringing in their seats with frustration as to how they would have solved that problem. And that, in fact, was part 2 of that exercise. Thanks very much.